So we're standing in front of some winter wheat, and the context of this trial and 3 others that we are going to be discussing is what we are looking at. The intent here is to develop best management practices for fertilizing a variety of crops following the 4R principles. The 4Rs, for those of you that might be a little forgetful, are the right place, the right time, the right rate, and the right source of fertilizer to be applied. What we're concentrating on this year is nitrogen fertilizer applications. There are really 4 different mechanisms for nitrogen loss. One of them is through gaseous nitrogen losses, and that's simply when we put a fertilizer down and for whatever reason, and there's a variety of mechanisms, they can gas off to the environment, they go up in the air, and they're gone. The second mechanism of loss is instead of going up, it goes down, and the nitrogen is leached down below the root profile and is lost to the crop. The third really isn't a loss mechanism, it's immobilization, and by that means the nitrogen is being tied up in a plant unavailable form for a portion of the field season. Generally, it comes out later on in the season, but it might be too late to give you some yield response to that nitrogen. You know, it might help in protein, but we may lose some yield as a consequence. The fourth loss mechanism really isn't a loss, it's the desired effect. It's plant uptake. That nitrogen goes up through the plant and is used for yield and for seed development, protein content, oil, whatever happens to be the commodity that you're growing. So it's not really a loss, but in a sense it is, because the nitrogen is moving, you know, but it's a targeted loss. It's a desired loss. You know, I really don't care where you stand from in terms of whether you believe in climate change or not. But the 2 mechanisms that we've got that are primary concerns are the gassing off. As I say, there's two mechanisms that happen when plants or nitrogen gases off. One is a process called denitrification, and there we lose gas to the atmosphere. The other one is volatilization, and again, it's specific really to a urea type of fertilizer, but the same thing. It gases off and goes to the environment. Again, don't really care where you stand on climate change. Your concern is it's losing it to the environment. And this is a growing concern. We're actually taking a bit of a step backwards in the province and maybe through Western Canada in a sense. When I started my career, broadcast nitrogen was a common application, and we knew it wasn't the most effective. Deep banding came in, and then we advanced it, and we went, we'd dropped the deep and just said side band applications or a mid-row band. As long as you could get that fertilizer into the ground, we could protect it to some extent. With time management being a concern, farm acreage being a concern, guys wanting to get fertilizer down in the fall if they can, we're seeing a lot of nitrogen being floated on. And I think most producers know that there's a loss associated with that floating on of nitrogen onto the surface of the soil, particularly if it's just left there without incorporation, and that's often the case because we're into a zero-till situation. To offset that, they're usually applying maybe 10 more pounds. So if you're applying 100 pounds, you know, you can expect to lose potentially 10 to 20% of that nitrogen if conditions are right. So you've lost, 20 cents on $1 investment. To offset that by spending another $10, doesn't make a lot of sense either, because you're still going to lose, and you're now upping it to 110 pounds to account for some losses. You're still going to lose 90 to 80%, or you'll retain 80 to 90% of that, but you're going to lose 10 to 20% of the 110 now. So you're left over with maybe 96 pounds of nitrogen into the system. It's a losing proposition. So that's the intent here. We're looking at these 3 crops. What we've got is winter wheat behind me for the first, then we'll move to a spring wheat, then we'll move to a canola. And as I say, nitrogen fertilizer is our concern, 4Rs. And really in this study, we are looking at 3 of the 4Rs. We're looking at time, we're looking at rate, and we're looking at the placement. When it comes to winter wheat, typically what we have done is broadcast the bulk of our nitrogen, if not all of our nitrogen, in the spring of the year. Winter wheat will start growing probably late April for most of us. You can come in and top dress early on in the season and have that fertilizer application out of the way. And that's what we've done here. We've looked at a variety of rates. We're going 0, 60. We jump all the way from 0 up to 60, and then we go increments of 30 pounds. So we go 90, 120, 150, and we've gone all the way up to 180 pounds of N. And we've put that on as a spring broadcast application. So those are our rates, and that's one of our times. The other alternative is we can put all of that nitrogen up front at the time of seeding. The pros and cons here, if we broadcast in the spring, often, that ground is still wet. And it may be, at a time that to come out and broadcast or float on some broadcast nitrogen, maybe later in the season when the ground dries up to get the equipment in to be able to do that, the grounds could still be dampened if we're just floating urea on, again, a mechanism for loss. If we were to band it, and we take those same rates that I described, and we put it all on at the time of seeding, so we side banded this on, so we're an inch below and an inch over to the side. The downside of that is, again, we can experience some losses because we're seeding in the first couple of weeks of September. That fertilizer, by the time the winter wheat starts germinating and emerging, that fertilizer is in available form. So it is subject to some losses at that time through overwinter. If we get some fall rains, we could wash down below where the root of that winter wheat presently happens to be. So we might be able to move some of that nitrogen below where we would like to actually see it. On the flip side of that too, a lot of that nitrogen could get into the plant, and if we have an open fall, we might encourage too much vegetative growth in the winter wheat. That can actually cause some problems in terms of winter hardiness. We have too much vegetative growth, we can actually decrease the amount of winter survival or the winter hardiness that we have if it's too nitrogen rich. Ideally, we'd like to see it going into dormancy in that 4 to 5 leaf stage. And there have been times where we can encourage too much growth and winter kill becomes a problem. So it's a bit of a trade-off. IHARF in particular, the Indian Head Research Foundation at Indian Head has done some trials in the past, and the philosophy that they've done, and Brian Bears, is to look at splitting those two methods of application. And that's what we've got on some of the trials off to the far right. We took half of the rate of nitrogen that we were going to apply. So in this case, for example, the 60 pounds, 30 of it went on in the fall at the time of seeding. And we retained 30 pounds and came in and broadcast on top of it. So as I say, Indian Head and Agriculture Canada, Brian Bears out of Lethbridge, Alberta, have had success with this mechanism. We're seeing whether here in Outlook under irrigation production, this is a system that may have merit for us. I think Joel has panned across. You can certainly see we have responses in here both to the time and to the rate of applications that we are putting in. We won't try to identify the plots right now, but Joel's going to pan across. And for example, these are broadcasts. We've got a few series of broadcasts, and I don't know if it'll show in the film, but there's a stepwise progression to our fertilizer rate. And then we actually move into some seed placed or split applications. And they are apparently doing better, in terms of visual health and visual stature of the crop. So come back in the wintertime, we'll discuss the results.